Back. We are back. We are the Coalition Loud and Proud, outrage porn free, civilly disobedient media, broadcasting live on the Worldwide Coalition Media Network here at the Go Local Live Broadcast Center, 90 Way Boston Street in the city we love, Providence, Rhode Island. We'll be brief. We've got a special guest on the line and a special guest in studio. Joining me in studio is Stephen Detoy. He's the Director and Government and Public Affairs at the Rhode Island Medical Society. On the line right now, joining us for a few minutes from the busiest, hardest working guy in Rhode Island, my hero of civil liberties. Of course, I'm talking about Stephen Brown. He's the director of the Rhode Island chapter of the American Civil Liberties Union. Gentlemen, both of you, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Only wish it could be better circumstances.
Better circumstances, to be sure. I'll again apologize to my listening audience and to my friends in the libertarian world. I missed this. This week, Governor Gina Raimondo signed into law one of the most egregious abuses of, I believe, and I'm not an expert, I just play one on the radio, of our civil liberties in recent times. Stephen, can you describe the legislation to the listening audience? Because I have a feeling many of them are just getting word of this literally for the very first time.
Which Stephen?
You. You're the star for the next 15 minutes.
Yeah, sure. This is a bill that was sponsored by the Attorney General, and what it does is it amends a law dealing with a State Department of Health database called the PMP, it's a Prescription Drug Monitoring Program. And in this database is every controlled substance prescription that is given in the state. The law until Governor Raimondo signed this new bill required law enforcement to get a warrant before they could access this database. What this new law does is eliminate that requirement. What it specifically says is that there are certain agencies, both at the federal and state level, that now can gain access to this database without a warrant. They simply have to have somebody who is a, quote, certified law enforcement or drug investigator sign a paper with a case number saying that they're engaged in a drug investigation, and that will give them the power to have the Department of Health hand over these records.
Now, this is astonishing on so many levels, but I have to ask you the first question that every one of my readers and listeners asked me when brought up to date on this. Whatever happened to HIPAA?
Steve?
Okay, the other Steve. HIPAA has exemptions for law enforcement and criminal activity, so this doesn't violate HIPAA in any way.
But certainly the spirit of HIPAA is being crushed.
The spirit of confidentiality of your own personal health care records, which is the underlying part of HIPAA, yes.
Stephen Brown, what was the circumstances that suddenly created this death race to provide such a violation of our most fundamental civil liberties? Why did this happen? What was the need?
Well, if you ask me, there is no need.
Right.
I think some people used the current opioid crisis as an excuse for passing this bill. We heard a lot of that. We heard a lot about pill mills in Rhode Island, even though there's no evidence whatsoever about pill mills. The one thing that I say over and over is I've yet to hear one argument, opioid crisis notwithstanding, I've yet to hear one argument why the current system of requiring a warrant was a problem. And I never got a good answer to that. There was never any evidence submitted at any of the hearings or on the floor that, getting a warrant has resulted in all these difficulties, because there aren't any. All this does is give the police agencies listed in this new law the ability, as far as I'm concerned, to engage in fishing expeditions.
And to be fair, this is not the first year that this bill has been introduced and debated at the State House.
That's right.
So
when people talk about the opioid crisis as the reason for it, it's a little bit disingenuous.
So that was just the canard that they used to get this passed. again, this is breathtaking. I mean, ultimately, first of all, on a constitutional level, Stephen, and that's, certainly amongst your many expertises, that's one of your primary ones. What's wrong with this picture? What on a constitutional level? Why is this such an abuse?
Well, I think everybody has a gut reaction to this notion of privacy and confidentiality, and certainly when you think about privacy, what should be kept confidential, probably near the top of the list, if not at the top of the list for some people, are their medical records, which of course includes their prescriptions. One thing I've noted, and it's worth noting again, is if police wanted to look in your medicine cabinet at your home, they would need a warrant. What this does is essentially allow them to look in your medicine cabinet electronically, but worse, to do it going years back. If they go into your medicine cabinet in your home, they're going to find what prescription drugs you have right now. By being able to gain access to this database, they can find out what you were taking a year ago, 2 years ago. I don't know how far back it goes, but they can see a history of your prescriptions that they wouldn't be able to get by going into your home and looking in your medicine cabinet.
Does this also extend into the state's medical cannabis program?
No,
Okay.
that it does not.
Okay. So then law enforcement now essentially has carte blanche. They can, without even, in fact, at this point, I say carte blanche, even that's really irrelevant because there's not even a superficial requirement for them to have any legitimacy to look. They need nearly meet the basic requirements, which is essentially be a law enforcement operator who is at some level, however peripherally, involved in some type of connection, however loose, to a drug investigation. Is that a fair synopsis?
Well, it's a little more limited than that, but the outcome is the same. So it is limited to certain agencies. So local law enforcement cannot, on their own, gain access to this information. They still need a warrant, although they now can go to one of the agencies that does have this power and ask them to do it for them. They do have to state that they are engaged in a particular investigation and they need these records. So, carte blanche is a little bit of an exaggeration, but the bottom line is there are a number of federal and state law enforcement officials who now will be able to look at your prescription information without the need to get a warrant or have any other sort of independent review to ensure that they really do have probable cause to believe there's criminal activity, and gaining access to this information is essential.
There is some language in the bill that gives so the access has to go through the director of the Department of Health. So there is a small hurdle there, but it doesn't say that she has the ability to reject these requests outright. But she is the official keeper of the database, so they do have to go through there. And as we have said, if it's going to be left to the discretion of one person, that one person should be a judge.
Right. Now, because ultimately, everyone else involved is either in a political appointment or politically elected. Because my next concern, of course, is safeguarding of these records. What controls exist to prevent the dissemination of those records into any one of a number of environments?
Well, I mean, the police who gain access to these records would have the same limitations in terms of disseminating the information as they would in any other context. If they've gotten them through a warrant or through some other more appropriate means. So it's more the intrusion that occurs with each individual look at a record. And I'm also very concerned about the precedent that this sets, because once you've opened this crack and said, it's perfectly okay for outside parties, and particularly law enforcement, to gain access to these records, you're opening the doors for similar requests for law enforcement for other types of medical records as well. And it's hard to see where you draw the line. If gaining access to medical information with a warrant is too much of a bother. Why limit it to just this particular database as to when they don't have to get a warrant? That for me is actually one of the most troubling things about the passage of this bill is the Department of Health's position in not strenuously opposing it. That's the agency that we count on to protect the confidentiality of our medical records, and for them to roll over and say, okay, if we're going to let law enforcement gain access to this information without a warrant, I think really erodes trust in the department. And from a civil liberties perspective, I think the ACLU now has to look very, very carefully anytime the department talks about gathering more records, collecting more records for any purpose, because I just don't see the commitment there to protect patient confidentiality that I would expect from an agency like the department.
And you asked the question earlier about the medical cannabis program, which is not included, but what is included is another state law that has passed. I'm not sure if the governor has signed the one that would allow the collection of naloxone prescription data as well through the PDMP, and naloxone being the antagonist to a opioid-induced overdose.
Right.
And that's a great point, Steve, because if that bill were introduced next year about introducing naloxone into the database, the ACLU would be strongly opposing it, as opposed to this year when it seemed like a very reasonable idea until the very end when this bill passed. But so what this means is now police will have access to that information as well, and it's very disconcerting.
And the reason why I have folks like the both of you on the show, and again, I'm grateful for your appearance here, because we want to be myth busters as well as folks who sound the alarm legitimately. I'm concerned with the type of law enforcement encroachment that can happen when folks are dragged into the system because of their particular involvement in a criminal case. I guess it goes without saying that if part of their prescription medical history involves psychiatric drugs, and at what point in time can law enforcement use that then as an issue that can be raised in terms of a legal proceeding that might be involved in some type of violent crime? I don't know the answers to that. What, as professionals, how do you address the concern of an ordinary citizen like me?
I think one of the issues that arises when you give police this power is you have to wonder what it leads to. So let's take an example. Let's say police want to look at the prescribing habits of a particular physician.
Mm-hmm.
They're concerned that he might be over-prescribing, whatever. The only way they really are going to find that out is by gaining access to a lot of patient information. Mm-hmm. And what happens then? Will they start questioning, from the information they gain, will they start questioning patients? Suddenly have law enforcement at their door, knowing that they've gotten these prescriptions, and they want to find out whether the doctor they go to has been over-prescribing them in some way. So it's very easy once you open this door to see situations where innocent patients get sucked into this, and it can be very very distressing. One thing that Steve can talk about, because we do hear about the opioid crisis and all this. Steve can talk about what the Department of Health itself has the power to do and has been doing, and why this whole notion of law enforcement being necessary is really a red herring. So I don't know if you want to talk about that.
Yeah, thanks for that, Andre. The department has access to that database. They can use it for a variety of reasons, to administer the program, to investigate physicians. They have already identified the top 400 prescribers in Rhode Island. They know who they are. They know what their prescribing habits are, and if something had arisen that looked like diversion or something else improper or criminal, they have the power and I would think the responsibility to have already reported that to the appropriate law enforcement agencies. The PDMP was designed to be a medical decision tool to allow physicians, dentists, podiatrists, physician assistants, nurses, and even optometrists, and to, I found out today that veterinarians are also having their data collected for controlled substances that they may be prescribing for their animal clients. So they've already had this power. This adds nothing to the ability of the state as a total to be able to enforce the laws about appropriate prescribing.
Then in so many cases of government abuse, gentlemen, why would you proffer that Attorney General Martin seems so hell-bent to get this? What is there an end game, or are you simply, do you want to avoid that conversation and really just focus on the detrimental effects of this? Any ideas?
Go ahead, Stephen.
Well, again, I can't speak to the motivations. All I can speak to is what they've said at the hearings, which, as we've said, I think as both Steve and I agree, their arguments just don't make the case. You can talk about pill mills and opioids all you want, but it doesn't answer the question, what's wrong with getting a warrant? It's not an either-or situation. It's not either we pass this bill or law enforcement has no way to gain access to relevant information. They always have had an ability to do that, and that's through a warrant. So the only two reasons I can see for getting rid of the warrant requirement are, one, convenience. The Attorney General's office, law enforcement hate getting warrants. They do, even though it's very easy to get them. They don't want somebody looking over their shoulder. They don't want to have to prove to somebody that they have grounds to engage in a search. They just as soon do it on their own, and a bill like this allows them to do that. And we've seen that in many other contexts where they've tried to argue they shouldn't get warrants. So that's one reason, and that's not a legitimate reason from our perspective. You know, the convenience of not having to go before a judge shouldn't be a reason to invade the privacy of tens of thousands of Rhode Islanders. And then the only other reason I can think of is that it's to allow them to engage in fishing expeditions. You can't get a warrant to do that. No judge would issue a warrant to allow you to just, rifle through records that are in a database like this. But they don't need to convince a judge anymore. So by having an investigation, they now have a lot of ability to search for information that they want to find instead of looking for the particular records that they think are there.
Now, and we're going to go into this in a little bit more depth, but we've only got Stephen for a few minutes. To a very large degree, in the immediate sense, the die has been cast. The law has been passed. The governor has signed it into law just over the protestations of the American Civil Liberties Union of Rhode Island, as well as 20 other organizations across the state. Interestingly enough, the preponderance of those organizations are not civil libertarian armchair experts like myself, but we're talking about, in its totality, virtually the entire state of Rhode Island medical community is screaming bloody murder over this in a degree of unanimity I don't know that I've seen in my lifetime living here. So we will challenge that in a second, but Stephen, right now the law has been passed. You can't, the position of the American Civil Liberties Union is you really can't sue, you don't have grounds to sue until someone has been harmed. Is that correct?
That's correct, and that's one of the unfortunate things. Until the damage is done, I don't think there is a way to challenge this law. I mean, it is something we're going to do some more research on,
right.
Because it's worth doing that to see if there are any ways to do it. But my guess is we're going to find that it's going to require learning after the fact of something damaging that's happened in order to challenge it. And of course, one of the problems with even that is damage may be done and you won't even know it. You won't know this because police have looked into this database, because all this is secret. The requests to the Department of Health to look at your records are going to be secret. So you're not even going to know necessarily that your privacy has been invaded in some bad way.
Stephen, I got to ask you: is there something in the Rhode Island drinking water? I mean, we've got three examples that are very current. I'm talking in the matter of the last few weeks between a municipality in Rhode Island that has decided essentially to create its own medical cannabis program, between a situation in Cranston where, despite nationwide evidence to the contrary in terms of anti-panhandling laws, it would appear that they've gone insane and just decided, okay, we need to litigate this even further. And now, in the case of, I'll call it, an attorney, my words, not any of the gentlemen here, an attorney general gone crazy, seeking to overwhelm the opinion and the experience of the entire medical community of the state. What is it about Rhode Island? Are we unique in just the degree of, I'll call it, legalistic stupidity that's out there? It's got to be baffling at a point. How do you do it, Steve? How do you fight this?
One case at a time. This is you have to take the long haul on these issues, and a lot of times it is fighting the same battle over and over. But that's what happens. The panhandling case is a great example. We sued them only a year ago over an ordinance. They acknowledged it was unconstitutional. And a year later, they passed another one that, for all intents and purposes, is really pretty much the same thing that they agreed was unconstitutional a year ago. I mean, they put some dressing on it, but we think it's pretty much the same in terms of the constitutional infirmities. Look, the Bill of Rights was not meant to be popular. Sometimes people can get, politicians can get a lot of votes by doing something that the Bill of Rights doesn't allow, and that's why I think you need an organization like the ACLU.
Absolutely. My words, not yours, but public tragedy should not beget poor public policy. And that's why, folks, if you're listening to this, regardless of how you feel about any one of the issues the ACLU has tackled, again, my words, if everybody's angry, then they're probably doing their damn job. And this is a perfect example of why we need a watchdog like the ACLU, because in the absence of their doggedness, the medical civil rights, my term, of the entire state would be ignored. Any sentient citizen of Rhode Island should be outraged by this, and that's why the ACLU needs your support. So I never put Stephen in the position of asking for money. That's what I do here. But we will, again, continue to publicize links to the Rhode Island chapter of the American Civil Liberties Union. Stephen, any closing thoughts? Again, thank you so much for carving out some time on a crazy Friday night with all this going on. But any closing thoughts to Rhode Islanders listening to this?
Well, the bill has now become law, but I still think it's appropriate for people who are upset about it to let the governor know. I know, and Steve knows, that her office got lots and lots of calls prior to her signing this bill, calls from people asking her to veto it. She ignored those requests. I think people ought to make their anger known by letting them know that they do not approve of this. Steve and I have talked about getting somebody to introduce a bill next year to repeal this awful law. We know it's going to be a difficult battle to get it repealed so quickly after it's been enacted. But if enough people are now learning about it and really are upset, then there's the possibility. And I hope that people, if they are concerned about it, will keep that concern, anger, upset, whatever, going till next year when hopefully a bill gets introduced to try to address it.
Excellent. Stephen Detoy is going to stay with us for a few more minutes, but joining us by phone, I want to personally again thank Stephen Brown. He is the director of the Rhode Island chapter of the American Civil Liberties Union, against my hero of, I'll call it, civil liberties. And again, a recurring force of nature here in maintaining all of our civil rights. Stephen, again, thank you for joining us tonight, and we'll be in touch soon.
Thank you, Pat. And thanks, Steve, for all your work on this issue as well.
Same to you, my friend. Thank you.
Folks, if you're just joining us, you're listening to the Coalition on the Worldwide Coalition Media Network, broadcasting live here at the Go Local Live Broadcast Center, 90 Way Boston Street, in the city we love, Providence, of course, the naked city, the city of 1,000 stories. I think you have to be of a certain age to remember
Yeah,
that.
I do remember that.
Steve Detoy, he is the Director in Government and Public Affairs of the Rhode Island Medical Society. Hopefully I got that right.
You did?
Let's take a deep breath. We had Stephen for a few minutes. Again, he is the busiest guy, I think, in Rhode Island.
Oh, he's the most tireless advocate in the State House. And sometimes I wonder if he ever goes home from the State House at this time of the year.
Yeah, it's astonishing and it's inspiring to watch him. Tell us a little bit. Let's step back for a second. Let's take a snapshot of your organization because, again, 20 different, and if there's more, let me know, but 20 different groups, ranging from, as you mentioned, podiatrists to dentists to veterinarians to general physicians. Seemingly everyone hates this.
Yeah.
Again, and I mentioned earlier, to a degree heretofore thought impossible.
I've now, in my 26th year, I've never seen a coalition of 21 organizations get together on a bill and literally just run smack dab into the politics of something.
Tell us about your organization. Give us a snapshot of what you folks do.
The Rhode Island Medical Society has been around since 1812. We represent the interests of the physician community in our state. We're loosely affiliated on the national level with the American Medical Association. We are here in Rhode Island. We've been here. We celebrated our 205th anniversary, I guess, this year.
Wow, that's astonishing. All doctors.
All doctors.
All ranges of practices.
Any MD or doctor of osteopathy is eligible for membership in a medical society. We represent them all.
In terms of the political versus the medical, most of your activity is geared more towards medical practice issues, or is it in the age of big government? Has that tilted now in favor of you spending a lot of your time with legalistic issues?
I think the vast majority of our time is spent advocating for physicians and their patients, and this is a prime example of where this invasion of privacy is primarily a patient-based issue, and the physicians have been adamantly opposed, and many physicians have written to us to say that they've had patients in their office in the last couple of days since they've been hearing about this bill who have told them that they've called the governor's office and responded to some of our pleas for action to get that veto taken. So I think it's instructive in some way, and I haven't quite figured out how yet, that she actually signed the bill and issued a signing statement applauding herself for signing the bill.
Right.
And they have the other option of allowing it to become law.
Exactly.
So she, in essence, turned a blind eye and a deaf ear to the folks who were calling her office.
Right, and that's actually a very subtle but very important point. And correct me if I'm wrong, but the governor has the ability to, in a sense, pocket approve it. By
Yes.
simply letting it become law, it's kind of the equivalent of a no vote, which I'm going to get to in a minute. A no vote where you might not have the political fortitude to oppose it, but you are simply going to let it pass the law. By her signing it, that to me is a de facto sign of approval, that you actually endorse the passage of the law. Is it a fair statement?
Yes, absolutely.
All right, so I'm not sure if you had a chance to do this, but do other states have similar laws? I mean, how common is this approach across the country?
Well, there are other laws that are other states that allow law enforcement access to the prescription drug monitoring programs. Connecticut, Massachusetts under certain conditions. New Hampshire, Maine, Vermont do not. They have very similar warrant requirements that we do. I'm not sure that most states have all the controlled substances in their prescription drug monitoring programs. These programs primarily came about in the last 5 or 6 years. Most states applied for grant funding from the Department of Justice to set up prescription drug monitoring programs looking at opioid prescriptions. And that was Schedule 2. That's how ours started 4 or 5 years ago. After a year or two of having it up and running, the health department came with a piece of legislation, came to the ACLU, the Medical Society, and all the other groups that had been watching the development of the prescription drug monitoring program, which we supported, wholeheartedly supported. We wholeheartedly support its use by the physician and prescribing community as a medical decision-making tool. That's what it was designed for, not for law enforcement. So there are probably more states that allow warrantless search than don't, but I'm not sure how many states have all the breadth of database in it that we do.
Right. Talk about, and again, if you're an armchair expert, if you're a fan of just about any conventional crime series, a recurring issue that's brought to us, just like we all now know the Miranda rule rights by heart, we are all led to believe that law enforcement has got very strict prohibitions in interfering with the patient-doctor confidentiality. How true is that in reality, and is it under attack?
I think that I am unaware of any example outside of the potential criminal activity by a prescriber. And I'm using that term because we have many professions that are allowed to prescribe controlled substances. It's entirely conceivable that you haven't seen a physician in 5 or 6 years, but you could have a couple from your dentist or maybe your podiatrist, your optometrist. Also are eligible to prescribe opioids at a certain level for a certain amount of time. So I don't know that it's been, that we've seen this level of breach of confidentiality ever. I think this is a pet peeve of the Attorney General, as Mr. Brown pointed out, that he somehow was prohibited from accessing something he wants to access, because he certainly hasn't told anyone why he needs to access the issues.
Right. And at the heart of this, I mean, we're in a position finally in our culture where we are at least beginning to step back from demonizing mental illness. We're stepping back from that as a culture, I think it's fair to say. We're not there, but we're certainly looking at that with a much more educated and more mature eye. At the same time, for folks who are under the care of a therapist or psychiatrist who are taking some type of substance prescribed, and in a manner in which it was prescribed, that this has got to be gut-wrenching for them to think that under some notion there are going to be people who have access to that.
Well, you've hit one of our nails right smack on the head. That while we are making progress in destigmatizing mental health conceptually, many individuals still feel very stigmatized by their medical condition. They do take prescription drugs to help them monitor and handle it. Some folks have substance use disorders. That's a mental health disease. Our fear, and one of the ones that was prominent in our veto letter request to the governor, was that if knowing that their confidential medical records could be accessed by law enforcement, that they would no longer seek appropriate treatment at the appropriate time and take their medicines and suffer the consequences.
And that's a terrifying thought for everyone.
Absolutely.
You know, we've run into this on a related issue. I'm intimately involved, if you will, with the medical cannabis program here in the state, and not to diverge too far afield here, but one of the fears with the Smithfield situation, of course, now is that folks who are, again, legitimately using cannabis under a state-sanctioned program, under a legal program, will find out that lots of people begin to know, because that's the nature of how folks are, begin to know that they are users, and there is a personal safety issue at stake there, because the product is illegal for other users, and there's a criminality that could take place in interfering with their storage of it. So then all of a sudden those folks start to walk it back. What has to happen before we begin, after all this time and all this experience, in your case, organization case, 200 plus years of practicing medicine at a very, very high level, and we are blessed, by the way, in Rhode Island, because we have some of the finest medical facilities really in the world within walking distance of our studio right here on Weyboston Street.
Absolutely.
So we are blessed. I wonder sometimes if we take that for granted. I know we do. But what has to happen for law enforcement to conceptualize? At this point, is it generational? Does there have to be a complete changing of the guard?
Well, you talk about law enforcement, and the Attorney General is still laboring under the failed drug policy that we've had in this country for the last 40 or 50 years, that somehow law enforcement can solve the illicit drug use by trying to limit the supply. This is America. We never let the demand exceed the supply, and we have demand. And in the case of folks who have substance use disorders, the General Assembly could have put some more money into treatment programs. We could be doing many things to help people with their substance abuse disorders, and instead we put our time and energy into passing this legislation.
Right, and we should have learned during the lapse, if you will, of the Good Samaritan law, that law enforcement, on just a practical level, law enforcement's attempt to use tragedy as a tool for interdiction will kill people. I mean, you have this situation where law enforcement in this state, again, my words, not yours, is hell-bent on preventing, and folks, if you're not familiar with the Good Samaritan law, essentially, if you were at a scene, and in many cases, folks might be on probation, and you reported an overdose or some type of incident, medical incident relative to the use of illegal narcotics, that while the Good Samaritan law, please correct me if I'm wrong, was in effect, that you could report such knowing that you would not be, the direct subject of criminal interdiction. We had to go through hell to get that back on the table. Again, at this Attorney General's insistence, he fought it every step of the way. Now, again, law enforcement thinks that somehow, in techniques right out of 1920s era prohibition, that they can somehow criminalize their way out of a drug crisis, when in fact, my opinion, I'd be interested in yours, it seems like they're doing nothing but exacerbating the situation.
They're not doing anything to address the real issue of the demand and the real problems associated with folks who have mental health and substance use disorders, that's for sure. And I might just add that the prescribing community in Rhode Island, it was partially responsible for the increase in opioid use in Rhode Island. Our physicians, our dentists were under a lot of pressure societally-wise to treat chronic pain in a more reasonable fashion. We had not been told at the point that OxyContin, for instance, was coming on the market, that it was highly addictive, and we prescribed too much of it and too often. But we have gotten that under control. And since 2013, Rhode Island prescribers have reduced the number of prescriptions by 25%, making us the second largest decrease in the country, 10 percentage points above the national average and way ahead of any other state in New England. So we are part owners of this crisis. We have taken that responsibility seriously. We're proud and happy and diligent members of the Governor's Opioid Overdose Intervention and Prevention Task Force. That task force is doing some incredibly creative stuff that's putting Rhode Island at the forefront of dealing with the substance use disorder issues that lead to opioid addiction. Unfortunately, while the supply of, so when you reduce the supply of divertible prescription drugs, there's only one place to go, to illicit drugs. And so we created more, that's just part and parcel of what we all knew would happen. We reduce one supply, the demand is still there, they'll seek out a different supply. And that supply now, unfortunately and tragically for many people, is infested with fentanyl. It is possible to survive a heroin overdose. You can survive several. Naloxone is a key player in that, that antagonist. You do not survive fentanyl. It is that powerful and that instantly will kill you. So most of the deaths from opioid use and drug overdose in Rhode Island is now caused or has fentanyl involved in it. The amount of deaths from just illicit drugs without fentanyl and/or divertible drugs is 10 or 15%. And I think there's a frustration. All of us who deal with this issue are frustrated that we've been making all the right moves that we can think of, and the simple addition of fentanyl into the heroin supply has caused the death rate to go up instead of down.
Where does the organization feel about legalization? Where are they on that?
On legalization of recreational marijuana,
Yeah.
We are officially neutral.
Okay. At some point, and I, again, just don't want to go off on this tangent, but at some point, does the legalization and the creation of a safe delivery system of recreational drugs have the potential to eliminate some of the issues regarding criminal involvement in fentanyl lacing drugs, criminal involvement in synthetic marijuana being introduced into the marketplace?
Well, because of the nature of the two substances you're talking about, one is an organic plant-based
Right.
product, where the other one is, well, it's plant-based, is more chemically induced. I think they're somewhat separate. The analogy is good, but they present different problems, because you can lace heroin with fentanyl, and unless you treat it with chemicals to determine whether it has fentanyl in it, you won't know.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a problem. I was speaking with a very influential senator this morning, or early this afternoon, about the possibility of providing heroin users with a testing kit.
Mm-hmm.
Just as we've tried to arm them with a naloxone kit, that they could test the substance before they used it. Now,
Mhm.
that is very difficult to operationalize, but that's some of the forward thinkingness at the State House that gives us hope.
So on one level, the debate is sophisticated, the discussion is sophisticated in the sense of how do we, on a practical level, either provide diversion or alternatives towards treatment and/or safer substances for the community that we recognize will continue to abuse them at some level, versus on this, you've got this dichotomy where on a legal level we're regressing almost.
Well, one of the issues that our leadership has talked about are supervised injection facilities,
Mm-hmm.
Which exist in other parts of the world and are starting to pop up in parts of this country.
Right.
Massachusetts has been talking about that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that would increase the safety for those who are able to utilize such a facility. But you think the issues that are going on in Smithfield, this NIMBY issue would be probably out of control, trying to cite one of those supervised injection facilities.
Yet at the same time, again, the dichotomy here is that we all know that the abuse is pervasive. It's across generational, economic, racial, ethnic bounds. And again, the challenge is, how do we have a mature, intelligent conversation without resorting to reefer madness style conversations? How do we address it legalistically and at the same time not expose people? It requires a level of discussion that I wonder if we're capable of at this point.
I'd certainly be willing to have that conversation. Yeah, I just want to point out one or two things about
Sure.
the bill that we didn't bring up in all fairness
Okay.
to the Department of Health and to the Senate. Before they passed the bill, they did put a 5-year sunset onto it.
Mm-hmm.
Very little, way too little too late, but they did put that in. The Director of Health is required under the statute to renew any agreement with one of the agencies on a yearly basis based on a series of reports of how many cases were open, what the disposition was of those
Right.
cases. And as my friend and my hero, Steve Brown, pointed out earlier, there's been no evidence of the shenanigans going on that have plagued our colleagues in the Appalachia counties around West Virginia, Kentucky, they have, in those states, also allowed physicians to dispense drugs. And there was a huge problem
Right.
with that, so.
So we are a very different world, yet we're trying to apply the same techniques out of, and again, my words, not yours, perhaps out of a political power play. Clearly, the next step is repeal. There's talk potentially of a special session, which may or may not involve POSOC subsidies. There's talk of a special session because of the budget crisis that we face ourselves in right now. What's your advice to Rhode Islanders, first of all, who are listening to this, hearing this really for the first time, really gaining through you and Stephen's remarkable contribution to the show and remarkable contribution to the public debate? They're gaining really an education of what is and what's true, what's urban legend. What's the first thing they should do after this weekend?
I think two things, so take some liberty here. First, visit both the ACLU website and, as of early next week, our Rhode Island Medical Society website. You'll see the background briefings that we've done. You'll see the veto request letter. You'll see the list of organizations. And then what you need to do is call your senator and your rep and not let them forget that they were part and parcel of passing these laws. I don't think that in the special session they're going to allow bills to be introduced. So we're probably waiting until January, as we had to do with the Good Samaritan bill that sunset ran out a couple of months ago. But basically have long memories as we head into 2018.
Right. Now, on a political note, we in the introduction, and again, it's on the notes on coalitionradio.us. If you go to tonight's show, you'll see in the notes for tonight's show, you'll see a list of the state representatives and how they voted. Again, from me, not my guess, a special extra dose of heaping scorn for those who chose not to vote. I'm not sure what the rationalization was for people who chose to vote in favor of this legislation. I'd be fascinated to find out, and we're going to attempt to find out through the use of the telephone. We'll haunt people. Love to hear it, folks. Love to hear what the sponsors were thinking, why all of a sudden certain sponsors are all of a sudden in bed with the Attorney General. But if you couldn't bring yourself to vote on this, if you somehow thought that you were going to step aside and keep the heat off while you were kind of opposed or kind of not, or you were playing political football with this, I have no words. Senator Ryan Pearson, my state senator, I believe, chose to be a NV, as they say. Now, if you have a note from mom and your doctor, who's essentially a member of the Rhode Island Medical Association, I'd like to see it, because maybe that's the only way we'll excuse it. But if you didn't have the fortitude, if you will, to step up and vote yea or nay on this, again, a dish of heaping scorn for you, for those legislators, and it was bipartisan opposition who chose to oppose this, including my good friend Maura Walsh. My hat's off to you, and we're going to reach out to all of those folks and support them, because it is not, we need not just criticize those folks and engage in the perpetual kvetching that takes place in Rhode Island. We need to support those legislators who had the courage to stand up for what is right, and those folks are duly noted as well. So we're going to take your words to heart. I hope you'll stay in touch with us regarding, feel free to use us to help disseminate and do whatever we can to disseminate accurate information. I certainly appreciate your appearance on short notice tonight, and of course, my hat's off to Stephen Brown for kind of clearing the air and giving us what's right and what's really going on with this. And let's continue to fight the good fight together.
Very good. Thank you much for having me.
Thank you very much, sir.
Appreciate it.
We're going to take a quick break right now. Of course, that's Steve Detoy. He's the director, let me get this straight, of Government and Public Affairs for the Rhode Island Medical Association here in the state. Again, we are blessed. I can tell you from personal experience with my children that we have here in Rhode Island literally some of the finest medical care in the world. We have teaching hospitals, we have medical facilities, we have children's hospitals, we have advanced neonatal NICUs here. We have everything really. We have folks who journey from all around New England to come to here and to come to Boston for the medical care that exists. We need to support that, and we need to support their fight so they can really advance the cause for all of us. Folks, again, congratulations to these folks because they like to, as we say, hashtag